We're going to be discussing Indigenous views of climate and migration and managed retreat. And it's one of those things I deliberately wanted views plural because there is no view. It's an analogy I kind of overuse, but imagine if we say all Europeans are the same, from say Basques to Finns to Chechens to such, and they're all just Europeans. And so we all kind of, sometimes we think of the same ways of thinking when it comes to say, Indigenous North Americans or such, but there's a lot of different viewpoints, historically conditioned through a lot of experiences, and everyone has their own interests. So I think this is going to be really instructive for us. I think, again, we do kind of tend to think to ourselves, right-thinking people have a certain viewpoint on these things, and I think it's really good to kind of check that a bit. So at any rate, without further ado, I'm going to be quiet, and I will let the speakers speak. So Julie, do you want to kick things off?
Yeah, so thank you so much, Patrick and Lily. And first, just apologies I'm still getting over a cold, so if I start hacking at anyone, it is nothing personal. I'll try to keep it to myself. So I am going to swear, our group is kind of swinging the geography a little bit. We're over in I'm over in kind of south of Susie Moser's old territory, I think. So I'm on the central coast of California. As Patrick mentioned, I'm an associate director for the Livelihoods Knowledge Exchange Network, which is a think tank bringing practitioners, policymakers, decision makers, communities, scholars together, working on issues around energy extraction and climate change. And as part of that, I co-direct the Rising Voices Climate Resilience through Indigenous and Earth Sciences program out of National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder. And so where we're coming together, we seem like kind of an ad hoc group. I think I'm going to kind of give a little upfront intro and then hand it over to Chantel and Leslie for really the meat and heart of it. I've had great fortune of getting to know Leslie over the years, who's been part of the Rising Voices family since pretty much the beginning, and has held our hands along the journey we've been on. And Chantel, it's been kind of that privilege where I did that crazy thing as a public anthropologist where I went for a while and, her family let me hang out on their porch and gave me coffee and food and, shelter. So that was lovely. And I am deeply appreciative. So where we're going to kind of come from is where, Patrick started talking about kind of these different views and perspectives and around issues around climate migration and human movement. And so I just want to take a couple minutes to kind of set a framework a little bit for where we're talking from when we think about this reality of our climate crisis. And there's millions and millions of people just, that are right now looking to relocate away from coastlines. And what does this mean in the coming years in the sense of real urgency that is paramount, right? And so we're offering today, is perhaps kind of a step back in thinking about this framing around this issue in order to think, how can we imagine more just and equitable ways to move forward together? And, I recognize when we're faced with kind of this urgency, it might seem a little bit counterproductive to kind of step back, to consider that foundation. But with so much pull towards producing these solutions, we really are at this critical juncture, I think, to pause and ensure that the proposed solutions that we're working on, will achieve the intent, the intended results. And so the framework for how we establish something really determines what follows. And, for example, I think one significant challenge in the U.S. context in terms of climate migration is there really is no currently no institutional framework at the national level governing environmental disasters that occur incrementally and do require relocation. And there are no policies or institutional support for the very lengthy and sensitive process of resettling not just an individual, but an entire community. And most federal policies and programs are written and designed based on individual, not community rights. And so we reflect on why is that, right? To start, it's important to look at that foundational framework from which our current policies and programs and practices emerged and are now being implemented as we're seeing in practice. And, I think about one of my dear mentors. He would often, remind me that in the Constitution, the word community does not exist, right? That's a document that people could say is a foundational framework for a lot of policies, and practices that have emerged. And so similarly here, I'd like to take a few moments to pause and consider, where we've come to this point together as a broader community, kind of working on issues around climate migration and the framework from which we do approach such work. And so up until this point, the main focus of managed retreat, not entirely, but by and large, has been on built, often urban infrastructure, on property and property rights, on zoning, and the planning and strategic kind of political will and organizing involved to coordinate all those varying components together. And so this framing of climate adaptation has focused largely on using Western-derived scientific data to assist distinct governing bodies and businesses with plan, and then also encourage the municipalities, developers, property owners, encouraging them away from the coast to retreat really out of harm's way, right? Trying to help people retreat out of harm's way from rising sea levels, eroding shorelines, and increased flooding. However, when we look at kind of the normative assumptions wrapped up in this framing, it largely ignores often the very people who bear the extreme burden of our climate crisis. And so in a process managed by outside entities, often speaking and acting for those who are the ones actually retreating, runs the likely risk of continuing expanding the historical oppression of certain communities. And so people are often missing altogether from the planning process. And when they are present, what often we see happen is that they are being homogenized, really, without accounting for the varying lives, histories, priorities, and knowledges they do hold. And so instead of being included, people can often be viewed, as strange as it seems, as kind of that obstacle, right? And they're having to be convinced to move. And the onus of that financial obligation to move, to pay for the relocation, is often put on the individual. And we must reflect, really, if that process of managed retreat has worked against, rather than with, and in support of people's own, assessment of their own, risk and desires and decision-making, whether in fact it is, a strategic adaptation plan. And so what people think of their own lives and places and culture really does matter. And so, further, when we look at these powerful entities leading these efforts, such as Western scientific institutions, governments, multinational corporations, work out what they consider to be these kind of, quote, best solutions, right, for the greatest number of people. And it's extremely predictable that the risk borne of those decisions negatively affects historically oppressed communities. We must consider, who is it that is included in this greatest number, and whom does this supposed, best solution serve? And so the concept of best solution, often in circumstances of managed retreat, is predominantly based on economic measures, discounting the non-material components, histories, practices, and lifeways that enable communities to function and really thrive. And so if the people who are themselves moving do not see themselves in this framing, and it is being done for them, right, as opposed to with them in partnership, we fall back on the historically problematic framing of this so-called best solution. And so by not focusing on the lived experiences of people moving, of their wisdom, of generational knowledge, and the differences among communities who need to move, there is a great likelihood that resources will be disproportionately allocated away from politically marginalized and economically poor communities, or that resources will stop at the point of removal. And so when we say managed retreat as kind of this framework for this process, the focus becomes on creating this buffer zone around the coast, right, on retreating. And we do succeed in the extent that, people and infrastructure are leaving. However, relocating is about more than just moving people and built infrastructure from one place to another, right? It's about reestablishing an intact community settlement that includes the key physical, economic, cultural, social, and spiritual infrastructure that enables the community, which constitutes more than geographic location, really to thrive in such a way as they determine in a location that makes sense to them. And so when we say instead community relocation as a framework, we are forced to consider this complex tapestry of people who inhabit a place, who leave one place and settle in another, who expand throughout their ancestral lands, maybe, and move beyond the confines of a geographically bound concept of community. So we succeed at the point of people being safe and healthy and satisfied in a new, distinct location. And so we also succeed in having a plan of action that comes with the community relocation geared towards the logistics of perpetuating culture after the resettlement. And so therefore, one really critical question is, how do people relocate with their culture intact? And this is where I am deeply inept at having a way to do this. And so I'm going to turn it over to two far more superior expert folks than myself to hear from them and their wisdom. So thank you for that. And Leslie, do you want to go next?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, I think you're doing a great job. Actually, I think she just said it all in a nutshell. So great talk today, you guys. No, just joking. But in akua, in akupuna, in aloha aina, o Leslie ke haunani ia o kea ko inoa no maui mai au a mea wa'a o ula. Ku'u mauna o Haleakala, ku'u vai o Makawao, ku'u makani o Ulalena. Aloha mai kākou. My name is Leslie, and greetings to everyone here. This is exactly what needs to happen, is a dialogue between everyone, coming to the table and discussing logistics. Basically, in a nutshell, the foundation of what we're talking about today is really what Julie has been talking about before me. And so thank you for that foundation that you laid out before us, Julie. And hi, Julie, how are you? I am a native Hawaiian, born and raised on the island of Maui in Hawaii. And so for a quick introduction, real quick, I am an educator at Manoa campus, and I write culture-based curriculum. I'm also a consultant in Oceania, where I focus on adaptation and resiliency and climate change, secondary to sea level rise with forced migration. So I work with island nations and how to better relocate their culture from point A to point B. What are we looking at that are viable products that we can actually move and actually do when they finally get to a relocation site? And so that has become my specialty while I have been with Rising Voices over the past 7 years in discussing climate change through an Indigenous perspective. So the dialogue today that we're missing, and if I talk too fast, someone just raise your hand. You know, I'm put in this position today to talk about the Native perspective, and I know it doesn't come easy for even my own people. So in saying that, please raise your hand if I talk too fast. The dialogue today in climate change is really discussing, or what is missing today in climate change is really discussing and understanding the Native perspective, seeing as it is Native people that are relocating. And so the fact that Native agency is not even at the table that dictates the logistics of managed retreat is an issue with severe ramifications, not just for Native people, but for all of us. We all live together. So if one group of people is not thriving, we're all not thriving. And that's really how we see it here in Hawaii. Therefore, Native people need to be part of the dialogue in finding solutions. We need to be able to be at the table to talk about ourselves, seeming as it will affect ourselves. That dialogue does not include Native agency, then that is the discourse. That really is the issue that is at hand right now. But more importantly, when there is another way of looking at the world, isn't there then another way of looking at the solutions? So by having a different worldview, different worldviews coming together in collaboration is the key today in finding different ways to solve climate change issues. And that really is what we do at Rising Voices. We have the Native perspective from nations and tribes, also from our Lahui here in Hawaii, but also from Alaska. We also have scientists from all over coming together. Many of us are Native scientists as well. I'm a PhD candidate here at Manoa. I'm just waiting to defend any day now. And so, but I work in geospatial science, connecting the sciences together with modern science today and Native cultures. So what I'm gonna do is briefly just share my worldview as a Hawaiian and as I see myself in relation to land that I grew up on and come from, to show you that relocating or migrating is not the first answer in dealing with climate change. I am able to trace my genealogy back 68 generations So this cyclical relationship with my own connection to place starts with my foundation, seen in my cosmology and practiced today through cultural traditions. I start by letting you know first of our cosmology. You know, there's so much to discuss. So of course the stories that come with our culture are so vibrant and vast. But I start in our creation story with Ho'ohokulani, where she becomes pregnant from Wakea, Sky Father. But the baby becomes stillborn. The baby is buried, and soon after, a taro grows over that gravesite. The baby is called Haloa, Nakalau Kapalili. This signifies a connection to the land and a connection to the taro plant. Ho'ohokulani becomes pregnant again, this time delivering a healthy baby boy and naming him Haloa. He becomes the first man and therefore first chief to our people. So in cosmology, we believe the land is our eldest brother. In a sense, when we take care of our eldest brother will take care of us. We take care of the land takes care of us. The taro plant signifies that relationship. When we eat the taro plant, it brings us sustenance, but it also connects us to our cosmology, our foundation, our ancestor. So that is our foundation. This is part of the dialogue that is missing to understand how we're connected, why we say we're connected to such things today. There seems to be a space where that is not even part of the dialogue, and so that is where there's conflict on both sides. In my introduction today, it is common to let others know how I'm connected to my place. So who I am is a direct reflection to my environment, but it also goes deeper than that. My connection to my place goes back further to genealogy. For example, I mentioned that the mountain that I connect to on Maui is called Haleakala, or in English translation, House of the Rising Sun. This mountain is talked about in mythology of the demigod Maui, in which he pulls up the sun in order to have longer days. This mountain is also in stories of Hawaiian discovery and settlement some 2,000 years ago, as our first ancestors of the Hawaiian race landed in their canoes. Therefore, the mountain connects me not only to cosmology, but to the origins of my people, my ancestors of the past, and also of the future. So you can see where I'm going with this, that there's a lot that is at risk to be lost in a culture because of our foundations, because of places that are tied to these certain stories that have come through our genealogy and ancestry over the years. What is important to know is how we interact with the mountain on a daily basis. The rising sun that comes over Haleakala can tell us what the weather will be like for the next few days. Amongst many other things that it does, it also helps me tell time on a daily basis, even without having a watch on me. So in this relationship, it is connecting me to the elements on a daily basis. But please be mindful that what I am sharing with you in only a few minutes takes a whole lifetime to understand. I'm a voyager on a voyaging canoe called Hokulea, and have been a crew member since '90. And still today, some things are not so obvious when I'm out there. And so it's a lifelong of learning our culture as well as other cultures. But when it's taken away, you drastically notice it. I also mentioned that in my introduction that the water I connect to is called Makawao. I grew up with the river behind my house that starts from the mountaintop and leads all the way down to the ocean. It is a waterway that allows for food sustainability. It is fresh, pure water, and you can drink it straight from its source. The waterway also acts as an indicator for how the weather will be further in the mountains and down by the shoreline. This is important if you hunt deer, wild boar, turkey, etc., or fish, which is very common on Maui. The waterways coincide with our moon phases, and as you grow up in this area, you quickly have an understanding of a cyclical relationship between man and land, and man and environment. I grew up with my favorite wind called Ulalena, which hits my face in such a way that tells me how the weather will be during the day. When I feel this wind, I know it's okay with the environment. When I feel another wind that is harsh on my face, I am aware that there is a weather disturbance somewhere else that has changed the conditions for us. And sure enough, within the next day, we start seeing rain, we start seeing a different weather, all by the signs that we have become to be smart about just from our own Indigenous knowledge base. With these elements of water, moon phases, stars, sun pathways, etc., there's so many. We have stories that connect all of them back to cosmology and genealogy through our stories. For that reason, when you become conscious of that relationship, your daily connection to these elements become a part of you. And so with saying all of that, how about we just pause right here and reflect? What does that mean when you are now relocated? But not only relocated from a group of people that did not do the research or were able to understand where you come from and have taken you from point A to point B without wanting to take your culture with it. What happens when you are without your land as a Native person? So managed retreat is a quick response without understanding implications that come with moving a culture. If I were to relocate, what would happen to me and my 68 generations that I represent today? And what would happen to my culture? Was that considered in all the logistics? These are things that we must ask today. So even though we say we're going back to form a foundation, I look at it as moving forward into finding better solutions, better ways, better collaborative ways to work together, to find ways for other people to now understand that culture has to be talked about, and Native agency has to be at the table. And so through research, we've already seen that it doesn't work when the powers that be move a people without considering these ramifications that come from moving a group of people away from where they connected to. Things that possibly change for Native peoples, and things that I have seen in my research and also my work in Oceania, it's quite alarming. You start seeing obvious signs of things that we could have solved, we could have had solutions to, but now we can learn from them. And so that is the plus side of this. We see that language changes. Native language is no longer seen in areas that you are relocated to. And that means you're speaking a foreign language. Health concerns are now obvious and apparent because you are no longer able to grow your own food. And so now you're taxing that system with the healthcare. Schools are foreign to the children and they don't do well. They don't want to be there. Relationships are at risk. Food intake. Today it's easy to go to McDonald's, but it's also easy to grow your own food. What is the difference that comes from going to McDonald's when you can only afford McDonald's if you're in that situation? Housing also goes downward, as well as what type of job are you working. So there's a lot of elements that we look at in my work of how to really keep the culture together and what things that we need to focus on when we're really seriously looking about migration. When we talk about managed retreat, really to us it means forced migration. So it's another way of looking at how we're seeing it that can be brought to the table to maybe massage it out to see how better we can collaborate together. This all leads to seeing a higher percentage of Native people in prisons with poor health, low graduation rates, and really just becoming disconnected from what and who they are as a people. And so in solutions, and I know I'm just here to talk about, the Native perspective and how we're connected to the land, but in solutions, we need to have Native people to be part of that dialogue, which I've mentioned a few times. And since we are the ones affected, then we should be the ones that have to have at least a say in that process. But was that 10 minutes? I mean, I could go on and on and on about this. You know, I have 2 master's degrees, and so one degree is on Tokelau and their migration. And within 10 years, they found that their language was nearly existing. And so the elders came together to form places to come together and speak their language. These are things that we need to consider today. And we can learn from those who have already gone through a climate change crisis or a forced migration secondary to sea level rise, as we're now seeing it in the United States, as well as we're seeing it in different parts of Hawaii, where there's flooding in the rural areas. And so in those rural areas, we have a large Hawaiian population that will have to be relocated back away from the ocean. But again, if you're used to, and you're used to being in those locations for generations, we're not people that really migrate a lot. But if you're used to that area, how are you going to survive when you're now in another location? So it's a hard thing to discuss, but at least we're now talking about it in this forum. But I think I'll stop now because I think Chantel can give another more descriptive example as to how their, oh, mahalo. I think Chantel can give an actual example, and I can add on after she's finished. I don't want to take up all the time. But thank you all for being so nice and quiet. I'm not used to that.
Guess that's the beauty of mute button.
Hi, Julie. If there's any questions though after, please feel free to ask me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leslie. That I always get super frustrated with time because I also would rather spend my day sitting here listening. But I guess for the sake of it, Chantel, are you still on? I see your, oh, it looks like you are muted. If I don't know if you're on the phone line, Lily, how do they turn off mute?
So if you're on a phone line, you should be able to do *6.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All you.
Thanks. Y'all are some hard acts to follow, let me tell you. So I am Chantel Carmadel. I'm the secretary for the Isle of Jean Charles Biloxi Chittimacha Choctaw tribe. We have been working on resettlement for just about 20 years now. We started in 1999 when our island was kept out of the levee system that's keeping the water out of the island, and the Louisiana Army Corps of Engineers decided that it was not feasible for them to extend the levee past our island, so we were no longer included in that. So our tribal leaders got together, and knowing our community is very tight-knit, we migrated to this area in the early 1800s after the Indian Removal Act. So the generations have been here, and knowing our community is so tight-knit and very dependent on each other for generational assistance and help, the leadership decided it was time to look at something on a community level, not just an individual moving level. Many of our families have started to leave at that time due to repeat flooding. My family, included in that, has left at that time already because our trailer was destroyed in a hurricane. It was flooded. So my dad made the difficult decision to leave the island that he was physically born on and raised. So he moved us to a safer place up the bayou, we call it. So, but knowing that how much of a burden it caused on just our family, moving away from everything we've known and the things that we're missing out on culturally from being on the island together with our generations before us, our grandparents, our great-grandparents, there's a level of disconnect from the community that we were seeing. And so the tribal leadership decided to look at resettlement on a community aspect. So we got together with our tribal members and community members and developed a plan that is feasible for everyone to move together, retaining our culture, retaining our social infrastructure, and not only retaining it, but allowing it to flourish again and rejuvenate once we would get to an area. So that was the initial plan that was conceived through these years of planning and constantly going through the red tape. And so we eventually got to the point where we could look for funding and assistance, and the state of Louisiana applied for a national resistant NDRC grant and was initially awarded it.
I think we may have lost a connection.
I'll text Chantal real quick, see if she's able to get back on.
Yeah, I don't.
In the meantime, it looks like there's a question for Leslie that came in from Susie. Leslie, I'm not sure if you were able to see that in the comments, but I could read it out loud so folks who might not be able to see the comments can hear it, and maybe we could talk about this question as Chantal is able to get back on. Is that okay?
I'll add, just in case she isn't able to connect, I don't want to finish kind of where she was going, but if you go, I'll put into the chat box, I'll copy and paste the link to the Children Tribes website. She's trying to reconnect right now. But on there's information and updated press releases on kind of where things currently stand as to what she was trying to talk about.
Yep. So this is from Susie to Leslie, and she says, Leslie, your telling of how you experience what is happening is powerful. I'm wondering whether you encounter white privilege colonialist folks simply not understanding what it means to be so deeply connected to the land as you consciously are, or do you experience explicit racist exclusion? Your answer may well be both, but does the first maybe offer ways to get back into a real dialogue, whereas the second most often just runs into fragility and defensiveness? Thank you.
Yeah, so that actually is a really good question. And while Chantel was talking, I was trying to figure out, how do I answer that? You know, coming from Maui, I now live on Oahu, which is where the capital is. And I am a PhD candidate. And the irony is I do geospatial science on elements of reference. And so I wrote the voyaging curriculum for Hokulea on the worldwide voyage. And in a sense, I'm saying why another pathway in education is needed to teach children that have been relocated a curriculum to allow them to understand where they come from. And so that in itself is controversial at this university. It depends where you are in Hawaii. On Maui, I am in my village, if you will. I am with my people. We speak our language. When I come to Oahu, I'm speaking English. So right away, there's a difference. And you all may know that we have a situation with a telescope here in Hawaii. It's the TMT telescope. It's a 30-meter on the Big Island. And for the most part, we are all against it. It's in a location that desecrates our original beginnings. And so it's a desecration. But of course, we're talking about astrology and astronomy. And so I talk about astronomy as a voyager, and but by not understanding it through a telescope, but by the environment. And so as you can figure out, it's very controversial in what I'm doing. It's also the first PhD to be done with astronomy, Hawaiian astronomy. So to answer that, both. But however, being put in this situation, it allows me to see what needs to be done and ways that we can move forward to collaborate and make things change. And so I use my degrees as a tool to get in to the door and get to the table and have a dialogue to at least talk about who we are. And so that really is what Rising Voices is all about. It's bringing us all together. And I think that's why I've been so attracted to Rising Voices all these years. It's because we have had very fruitful conversations in what we need to do. And our work does go far. It has been seen in Congress. It has been seen in other areas of the United States as to what is our solutions. And just very proud to be with Julie and everyone in an open space that is non-threatening. And so by being in such a, I would say definitely a racist environment at the university, it also has opened a pathway to wanting to collaborate with those that are open to hearing an Indigenous perspective. And there's many out there. For instance, my committee has 4 older white men on it, and they are all open to what I am doing. So, racism comes in different packages, and it's not always the older white man, thankfully. And I've noticed that it also comes from our own people. But that's part of the product of being colonized and assimilated, and in Hawaii, we're occupied. And so there's the political that also comes with understanding who you are as a Hawaiian here, and who do you want to trust with your knowledge. But in voyaging, we understand that our knowledge should be given freely and write about it. And so that's where we are right now. I hope that answered your question.
I thought it was a terrific answer to a terrific and difficult and important question. Yes, Susie says yes, it did.
Okay.
It looks like Chantel made it back on, right?
Yes, sorry guys.
Oh, that's fine. It's technology.
Yes, sometimes it's great, sometimes it's not. And actually I was listening to the answer to your question, and I don't know what the question was, but so just kind of, because we are running out of time, just a basic understanding of our resettlement is, for the first 18 years, we planned as a community. We've had partners come in like Julie, Lowlander Center, several other nonprofits, Rising Voices. Some of the people that we've met through Rising Voices have come in and helped us learn the skills of collaboration and planning amongst ourselves. So we kind of really had a good plan that was very resemblance of our culture and our community's desires of what we wanted. And in the last 3 to 4 years, the state of Louisiana has come in with this new grant proposal and did the opposite as far as for planning purposes. They have planned more from the top down. So they haven't included our culture. They haven't included us in discussions. We were present at the table, but present to check off a box, not present for wanting to hear our actual ideas and plans. The state planners looked at our plan as aspirational or in manner, like that's a good idea and concept, but it doesn't work in today's society. So just understanding that and understanding that just because it doesn't fit the mold of society today, looking how we can stretch the mold, how we can bend or even throw the mold away and just say, okay, this is what works for this community. Some elements may work for other communities, but not the whole thing. They work for all communities. So just looking at planning and resettlement through lens of community specific, individual specific, however it works for that, for what project you're doing. Not necessarily thinking, okay, we have to solve the whole world's problems, because what may work for us may not work for you guys in Hawaii or the Alaskan natives or even those on the East Coast or West Coast. So just having an open mindset goes a long way with community planning and dealing with the community and understanding that there's community structure and there's some individuals that want to be individuals and you can treat those as individuals. But when you look at a community plan, honor those cultures and those leaders that have been planning or been on the ground planning, and listen and opening up those tables to actually listen and not just say, okay, yeah, we have the community present, but actually listen and give them a voice and let their voice have power, not just be a voice saying, okay, yeah, we took your suggestions down, but we never implement anything. I think those are some of the important things of when we think of community resettlement, we have to not only think of just having the community present, but actually giving them power and voice, but also thinking about what happens after you come in and relocate this community. When you move out and your resources move out, will this community survive past the 5-year threshold? Will this community be able to reconstitute itself and rejuvenate itself to what it once was in that new space? And who's going to be there to do that but the community? So they have to be that driving voice in the plans and the discussion. So I think that's all I have.
Well, thank you so much. This has been incredibly fascinating. We have like 5 minutes, and I don't want to take up any extra time with any announcements, although I did want to briefly mention our group has been re-upped for another year. So we're having discussions we're going to have discussions in the near future about where we're going to take this and about our relationship with the Climate Migration Network. And so anyone on the call, please feel free to get back to me with your ideas on this. They'd be greatly appreciated. But I'll just be quiet. I think we have a couple more minutes for questions if anybody else has them. So fire away.
And just to flag, I think there's one more question in the chat from Dave. I don't know if all the speakers can speak.
Hi, it's Dave. That was my question, just in case we ran out of time. But I was wondering for all the speakers whether your particular community found any connections with or learned specific lessons from other Indigenous groups who are experiencing natural events like monsoons, so cyclical events, but stayed in place. Just curious if you identified with other communities that were going through some similar things, but did not relocate or do not plan to.
So we, this is Chantel, we contacted the Quinault Nation in Washington State, and they're actually staying on their land. They're just relocating onto a ridge on their own land. So we have contacted them, and we're in contact with several communities in Alaska and other places, and it is very insightful to speak with other communities to see if they're having the same struggles and the same issues, and we've found that they have. They do. We all have the same similar issues, even though we're on different timelines of the resettlement or relocation. Where they were at this time, we're having the similar issues. So it is very insightful to meet with other communities, and I encourage anyone who is doing work to reach out to other communities.
I think one just quick note I wanted to add is also, you know, and I think both Leslie and Chantel had talked about this a bit of, you know, obviously relocation being a total, you know, last thing to do, right? Everything else is tried before you go to that. But, you know, as Chantel mentioned, her community's been working on this for over 20 years. And so it's taking a long time. And, you know, that's generations born in that time. And so, you know, I think there's also a really important part of this that we haven't really talked about as much as, you know, what happens kind of between, you know, this time that these decisions are made and that communities are not penalized for making those decisions proactively because it's taking so long, but they're still needing resources. They're still needing to thrive and be viable in the places they are, even if a community, say, has declared, okay, we are looking to move. It's not going to happen tomorrow. It may not happen the next year or the next year. And so there's also this big chunk of the conversation is how can communities still be supported in place, even if they have made that announcement that they are looking to move in the event, you know, the place they live is no longer helpful.
And also in Hawaii, we look mostly towards Oceania to look at solutions or that other countries have done. Not so much part of the U.S. continent. So we look at Kiribati, we look at Tuvalu. A bunch of us do work with Tokelau, the island nation of Tokelau. And so really their issue has gone to a point where they are going under the water within the next couple decades. But we're looking at how they're trying to slow down the process with seawalls and by digging up sand from the deep sea and bringing it in to make their beaches bigger before that actually happens. And so in Hawaii, these are just a few things that we are doing today, is digging from the deep sea, making Waikiki bigger. Do we really want to do that though? No, I'm just joking. But research has shown that Waikiki will be underwater within the next 30 years. So by 2050, the hotels have to go somewhere else, and that poses an issue. But today, the beaches are the main concern as to how to keep those beaches in place for the tourists. So yeah, we are learning from other people that have or are going through crisis as we speak.
Great, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much. And so thank you all to, you know, all of our speakers. Mahalo. I really appreciate everybody's time. This has been an amazing discussion, and an hour is just not enough. So anyway, thank you all. Next month we have Devin McGee and Sherry Brokop-Binder will be discussing the technical aspects of FEMA buyouts. And Shamika Hansen requested contact info from the speakers. So maybe Lily, if you can maybe send a quick email out, or we can just